Good morning. Good morning it is in the city of Lorain today. On behalf of our Board of Trustees and our staff here at the Lorain Historical Society, I want to welcome you to the inaugural event of Community Conversations. My name is Spencer Rule, President of the Board of Trustees, and it's just an absolute honor and privilege to be here with you all today. Please join me in giving a big Lorain welcome to our guest of honor, Mr. Eric Wobser. Eric, we're delighted to have you with us today and really looking forward to your thoughts about economic development and particularly the city of Lorain. I also want to give a thank you out to our sponsors, which help make today possible. CHN Housing Partners, Leadership Lorain County, Lorain High School 1961 A and B class reunion, Main Street Lorain, the Nord Family Foundation, Second Harvest Food Bank, and board member Sarah Stilgenbauer. Thank you so much for your support of Lorain and the Lorain Historical Society. Over a year and a half ago, our board went through a strategic planning process and setting the course for the next 3 years for our organization. One of the objectives of that plan was to create programming to engage a larger audience. With over 100 people in attendance today, I think I can say we accomplished that. I want to acknowledge our Executive Director, Barb Piscopo, her staff, and board member, Laura Bustani, who were all integral in launching this new series. Thank you for all the work you've done over the last several months to get us here today. Lorain has had some very nice wins over the last few years, but we know there's more work to be done. Community Conversations is a chance to bring exceptional thought leaders to Lorain and create dialogue to help Lorain continue to move forward and shape the next chapter in Lorain's history. It is quite fitting we are hosting this inaugural event in a former Carnegie library named for Andrew Carnegie, who once said, "To try to make the world in some way better than you found it is to have a noble motive in life." We are all here today to start a conversation to try and make our world of Lorain, Ohio, better than we found it. And I thank you for being a part of it. At this time, I want to introduce Laura Bustani, who will be introducing Mr. Wobser. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Laura Bustani, and I am the External Affairs VP for CHN Housing Partners. We're a developer of affordable housing and a board member, like Spencer said. It's my honor and pleasure to look around this room and see every seat taken. This is what we envisioned in the beginning because we wanted to start a conversation about how to move Lorain forward. So thanks to every one of you for being here. Eric Wobser is a seasoned leader and the current CEO of the Greater Cleveland, that's where my head is, Greater Sandusky Partnership. He has a proven track record of success in many areas, including community and economic development. He was the City Manager of Sandusky for a number of years. His work saw transformative achievements, including securing the passage of a joint income and admissions tax increase, spearheading the Bicentennial Vision Plan, resulting in $300 million investments, and revitalizing the waterfront through community planning. Prior to that role in Sandusky, he served as, he was the executive director of Ohio City Incorporated, a community development corporation in Cleveland, where he doubled the annual budget, attracted over $100 million in public and private investment and manage the Ohio City Farm, one of the largest urban farms in the country. And we all know that Ohio City is one of the most desirable places to live in Cleveland, partly thanks to Eric's work. He also, in very recent couple of years, served as the chief of staff to the then newly elected county executive, Chris Lorain, in Cuyahoga County. Eric, this is the most interesting part of Eric's bio. Eric has a JD from the University of Michigan and a BA from Ohio State University, so he has, oh, I'm so sorry. Ohio, yeah.
Very important.
He sits on many boards and commissions, and he's a thought leader, a great person, and a great partner to many, and that's why he's here today. Please help me in welcoming Eric.
Good morning, everybody, and good morning, Eric. I don't know how to follow all of that. I love when people say you're a seasoned leader. People have said that of me before, and I know, knowing those people, I think, I wonder what they're really meaning when they use the word seasoned. Do they mean old? Do they mean incredible? Do they mean, oh my God? You know, what do they mean? So I love it.
Yeah, it's actually the first time I've heard seasoned, which was a little bit abrupt. I'm still adjusting to it. I remember in 2014, people said I was the new young city manager of Sandusky. So at some point in the last decade, I've crossed over into seasoned, which is...
Just wait.
Yeah.
We really are very happy to have you here as our inaugural speaker. And we're going to do this in a question and answer format. I've met Eric several times. We've talked at great length. A lot of things that he says I really resonate with myself, and I think we're going to find this a very interesting conversation. We hope to leave some time at the end for questions from the audience. We'll have two people with microphones up front for you to ask your questions. They'll pass the mic, and if you're seated in the back and you'd like to ask a question, there's a microphone right behind Mike Hugh, and so you can go up to the microphone and ask your question. And we hope we have time for those, and we will make it a point to make time for questions from the audience. So thank you again for coming. Eric, I guess the question that resonates with me, you know, I work with a number of young people, and they say, oh, I can hardly wait to leave Lorain. I'm here in Lorain, I just got to get out of here. I mean, there's nothing here. I want to go to a bigger city. I want a bigger community. And you've done that, and you've come back home. And you did that again, and you came back home. So what is it that keeps drawing you back to Sandusky?
Absolutely. So before I do that, I just want to also just briefly thank you, Barb, thank Monica for setting this up. Mayor Bradley, the fact that you're here is a real honor. And before we dive into the why come back, you've already won in Lorain. The fact that this community conversation series has gotten started and you've gathered the community together, you know, at the end of the day, that is the beginning, and the most necessary piece is doing that. So congratulations on that, and on everything I've seen. I came out, last week or the week before and got a tour to prepare for this and saw all the amazing things happening on both sides of the river, from the streetscape to the hotel that Radhika did to everything happening at the harbor and the brewery that was announced, I think, the day we were here. And I walked into Speak of the Devil, and there were 5 people randomly from Sandusky sitting at the bar. And so what an incredible attraction that Kurt has built there in that little side street right near downtown. So I think, so why get people to come back? I think that's a great example, right? Is think of the impact that Speak of the Devil and the time that Kurt has opened that has had on Lorain, the number of people it's brought in here. And I think in these smaller cities, it's hard to get young people to realize this before you send them out in the world. But at the end of the day, the difference they can make, the meaningful, and I would say too, there's a huge, as I've become more seasoned, I've realized the personal side to this too, but from a professional perspective, the idea that you can make a difference in a place like Lorain and not be a number. You know, I was just in Columbus yesterday for another speaking panel that I was on for work, and it was impressive, the scale of everything that was happening. But there were so many people there, and it hit me that I was going to go back to Sandusky, and it was going to be this sort of compact, walkable community. And there's a lot of charm to that. And the last thing I'll say too is, and I think people don't realize this, to the extent that people continue to have ties to places like Lorain, For me, it was having kids. I was in Cleveland, I was working, and things were going great. And then all of a sudden we had kids, and I'm like, I don't know, something just kicked in. I'm like, I want to go home to Sandusky, and it was to be closer to family. It was to be closer to a community that I cared about, that I remembered growing up in. Like, all of those things ultimately are what brought me back. And I think the one thing that we have to do, though, to be authentic and to resonate with those young people is don't try to force them to stay. Give them the tools with their education, with their training, with the exposure they have to other places so that they can go anywhere, but instill in them such a pride of where they come from that they choose to come back and to make a difference in their hometown.
Thank you. And I have to acknowledge this before we go further. There are a lot of young people in this audience today. I don't want anyone to think that we don't realize that young people either have gone away for college and then maybe done something different and come back, or young people have stayed here because they believe in their community. And I do think in the time that I've been here, we shortchange our young people here in Lorain. And I understand that, but we have to realize that in the 12 years I've been here, a lot of the young people who didn't find their voice or didn't have a place now have a seat at the table. Matt Kushner works for the city of Lorain. Christopher Coco was president of the Main Street Board. Max Schaefer's the director. And I could go on as I look around the room. So our young folks have come back, and they are working hard to make a difference. And we just need to encourage that. Us seasoned leaders need to make sure that we mentor them and keep giving them the tools and the encouragement they need. Because Lorain needs them very, very much. And you mentioned, I think the first time we were at Speak of the Devil, there's a theme here. The first time we were at Speak of the Devil, you talked about creating an environment in a community that welcomes young people and that encourages young people to stay. Would you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we have a saying that we use in Sandusky, and I think I stole it from someone years ago, and it might have even been in Cleveland at that time. So we've changed it over from Cleveland to Sandusky, but it's this idea that the only thing that Sandusky needed was a generation of people that didn't remember when it used to be better. And we say that, and I don't mean that about age, but I mean that as like how, regardless of age, because Barb, I view you someone who also, like me, is seasoned, who sees Lorain not for what it was, but for what it can be. And that doesn't mean you have to give up of the proud past of what has been, because in many ways, the most authentic way to get to where you need to go is to build on that proud past, but not to try to hold on to it so much that you can't build from those assets into something else. And what I would say is, whether I first noticed this when I was working in Ohio City and Cleveland, and I've noticed it a great deal in the time that I've been in Sandusky, is that many of the businesses that get started that are the spark of revitalization, or the spark that people get excited about, that kind of leads to the momentum that leads to larger things happening next. They're people who were probably from that place or from its suburbs originally, who did go away to somewhere else, and they learned a skill or a tool and had an idea for something great that they saw, like classic cocktails, and then they came back to their hometown. And what's so great about that is when they make that choice and they come back, ultimately they're bringing all that knowledge and that exposure. They've been sort of globalized out in the world, and then Lorain becomes a more globalized place because there's a lot of people living in it and working in it that didn't have to go away because they got exposed to what these other people sort of had pollinated the community with. And so, I view age as a mindset. And I'm at the stage now as a seasoned person where I'm hiring people who are legitimately 20 years younger than me for the first time. And I've had to sort of go through this transition of being the person who viewed myself as the young person trying to fight my way to the table, to realizing that I may be viewed as the person that other people are trying to elbow out of the way. And I'm kind of halfway. I just turned 45 recently. And it's sort of like that mid-career point in some ways, where I think I see both the value and wisdom that comes with experience, and really respecting and thinking about the mentors along the way who paved the way for me to be successful, but also the new ideas that we have to embrace. And I think it's a process, and I think young people would do well to understand, to really value the experience that existing and mature leaders in the community have. But those mature and existing leaders need to really find ways to create and open up opportunities for young people to lead, because ultimately their choice to stay here, their choice to invest here, is what's going to drive demographically whether the community succeeds or fails. So.
I think those are really, really good things for us all, especially us older folks, to remember. And I really like what you said. we want people to remember Lorain certainly for what it was, but people to really work to make Lorain what it really could be, because it's not going to go back. I mean, as much as here we are at the Historical Society, you know, as much as we work to preserve so many things about the past of Lorain, you know, this year we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Lorain tornado, and we want people to remember that, but what we want them to remember, to honor those who passed away, but to remember the resilience of that community, the hard work, how they got all that stuff that, you know, was the debris from Broadway and cleared it within a week. People worked together. They brought in, you know, fire departments, police departments, crews, construction crews from Cleveland, from everywhere to do what they needed to do to move forward, to get beyond the tragedy and to rebuild their community. And so that's the thing that we need to highlight, always the lessons of what did that past teach us? It was a rich history, but how can we move forward? So I think those are really important lessons for all, old and young alike, to remember.
And just really briefly on that, a lot of our rallying cry when we first got going in Sandusky was around the celebration of the city's bicentennial. And I think there was some segment that was sort of like, let's treat this as a historical commemoration of everything that's happened in Sandusky. But our whole theme of that celebration, it was blending the knowledge of those who really knew and valued Sandusky's history with the energy of people that wanted to take it into new directions. And so we said repeatedly throughout those few years, and Mackenzie, who is our coordinator of that process and works with me now at GSP, was a big part of that. This isn't about the last 200 years, this is about the next 200 years. But we were absolutely building on everything that foundation was the last 200 years, but where we were going was really what we were after with that celebration and the creation of that vision. So.
One of the things when I came here and was interviewed for this job, I think one of the things that I really remember about what it took to get the energy for this organization to move forward. We acquired this building, you know, we worked really hard to renovate it, and we did a lot of important groundwork, but we needed to do something to bring people to this building. And I have to say personally, it was my experience as an entrepreneur that really helped me do that really helped me try some different things that maybe hadn't been tried before, do things in a different way, because I knew from owning my bakery that you just don't put up a sign that says bakery, come on in here, and expect every car that drives by to come in and buy a cookie or a donut or anything like that. So you have to constantly get your name in front of people and have the fearlessness to try new things. You talked one of the times that you were here about that culture of entrepreneurship, so essential to the redevelopment of a community. Could you share with these folks what you meant by that?
Yeah, I think, and this gets into the earlier part about not remembering when it used to be better. At the end of the day, a community is a product, and if you're not, and it's more than that, but just like a business, it's either declining or it's growing, you know, and there's a book I read, Good to Great, that talks about how a lot of businesses sort of hang on, and most bad businesses fail, and so, but those that are just kind of getting by, how do they get from that stable place to greatness? And I think that's a really good model for communities, because at the end of the day, communities don't go out of business. You know, bad business will fail, but arguably, if Lorain were a business, if Sandusky were a business, if any industrial city in the Midwest were a business, we would have went under. Most of the companies that were driving that did go under, but we didn't, because communities don't go away, they change. But we had to figure out, with this product, with these assets, with these challenges, with these debts and credits that we have in our communities, what do we do to move forward? And that's an entrepreneurial endeavor. It's basically, you know, taking stock of what we can build on and what people respond to. It's understanding markets, and it's not only that. There's so much more that a community is responsible for doing, but if you're trying to position it for the future, you need an entrepreneurial mindset. And that starts with the small businesses that are popping up and that have a vision for what Lorain can be, but it's also the vision of the civic sector, the philanthropic sector, the public sector, and kind of saying, okay, how do we work together to take appropriate, calculated risks to lean into the future? And it's not easy, because you know, a business has to convince a customer to buy it or a bank to lend to create a product. You insert politics into that, local politics, and it makes it even harder. And there are people who are, I think, in the business of disagreeing, but there's other people that will stand in the way of almost anything that's happening that seems like change for political reasons sometimes. And maybe even they want positive change, but they're afraid of the political consequences. And most of the time, as I've had a chance to interact with other cities that have gone through similar challenges and are facing similar moments, like Lorain has faced, like Sandusky has faced, it is usually that fear at that moment to do something that people in the community are opposed to that holds them back. Saying we can't invest in that because it's not a basic service, saying we're not going to do that because where are people going to park? However that manifests itself, you have to fight through it, and you have to get something done. And then once you get that one thing done, you have to get the next thing done. Like I had a city commissioner, a great person, that came up to me. We had gotten through a few big projects in Sandusky, and he's like, all right, can we just get back to the basics now? And I'm like, well, what if 100 years ago in New York City, they would have just said, okay, we're gonna stop now. And I just mean like a city, and the mayor knows this better than anybody, a city's work is never done. Like life is happening to us, the changing world is happening to us. Either you have to lean in and adapt, and that's entrepreneurship, or you get run over, and I think that it's a really tough choice. It's a daunting choice. That's why it hasn't happened in a lot of places. But I think it's necessary. And again, it's a ground up approach as much or more than it's a top down approach. Like talk to those young people who are trying to find their place here. And it's not only people who are from Lorain. A big part of this is gonna be people who aren't from here that come here and fall in love with it and see the opportunity for themselves. And that's gonna be particularly more important as our communities have gotten smaller and as people that are priced out of or have climate change forcing them out of other parts of the country, and they come to places like Lorain that are relatively affordable, that are historic, walkable, authentic, and in a place where there's fresh water and the climate isn't killing us, but you have to be able to make them feel like they can discover that process for themselves and live their best life here. And it isn't easy, but it's critical, I think.
You talked about the fact that a lot of different organizations representing different sectors all have a role to play. As I saw people coming in today and look around the room, we have entrepreneurs in this room, we have educators in this room, we have elected political people here from Lorain and elsewhere, we have people who work for city governments here, we have people from nonprofits here. Can you just elaborate a little bit on how do we bring all that together? I mean, we can't always be sitting here as much as we would like to and listening. We've got developers here. I mean, we've got a really amazing, and I'm really grateful for you all for coming. We've got banking people here. We've got a lot of different sectors of the community represented. How do you create that collaborative environment?
Well, what I would say is it's a work in process. If I acted like we had a silver bullet for that in Sandusky, we don't. We're working through it. We're trying to figure it out.
I was hoping.
And it's happening transaction. But Beth Maiden, who's the head of our local community foundation, is a great partner to us, and she's worked in Lorain and is a Lorain native. I think at the end of the day, it's always going to be a matter of trying to pull things into focus, because a community foundation, a nonprofit like a historical society, a public sector entity like the city, and I will say there's examples already in Lorain. I've seen that the Metro Parks is playing an active role in your public waterfronts. I even saw that the Port Authority is helping managing some public space. So I see the signs of collaboration here. And I think the biggest thing is for a place like Lorain or a place like Sandusky, and we're in the middle of this process now, is how do we say, okay, everyone has an individual mission to accomplish, but at the end of the day, I guarantee almost every one of these organizations, the core of its mission is creating a more vibrant community with a higher quality of life for its residents. So how can you plan together and without taking away the governance responsibilities of a city council or a foundation board or the companies need to make a profit, but say what are the things, not everything, but what are the things that we share in common where we can each play our role, and this is who we want to be. I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing that you have to agree on, that the outside folks that you're trying to get to move here or to invest here, is that this is where we believe Lorain is going. This is what we're going to build around for the next 20, 30, 50 years. And if they see that, they will respond to it. And I think that's a process. You got to get everybody around the table. You got to keep them around the table. You got to realize it's not always going to go its way. The human ego is a really complicated thing. Politics, is a very complicated thing. But you never arrive. You're just always trying to hold that core together. And so I'd say, plan together, align resources around a plan, celebrate success, and allow for everybody to be a part of success. The amount of things I've seen go bad because the county doesn't want the city to get credit for something, or it's like you have to get through that. At the end of the day, if good things are happening in Lorain, that's going to be great for a mayor, it's going to be great for a nonprofit, it's going to be great for a business, it's going to be great for a county commissioner. And rather than pointing fingers and blaming each other for why things don't happen, it's about finding a way to make something happen and then celebrating rightly that everybody played an important role in that.
Thank you. I think that ability to continually stay in your lane, but then also to collaborate is really where the rubber meets the road too, because everybody has their role to play. Government has their role, nonprofit has their role, history has their role, whatever, and we have to bring all that together and constantly work to continue to communicate and make that happen. And it's not easy at all. I noticed even things that we've done as an organization when we try to combine with another organization. Every organization has their culture. City Hall has its culture. We have our culture. Second Harvest has its culture. And merging company cultures together enough to really collaborate, you kind of have to get out of your head of the way you think things should be done. And that's hard when you're like me, used to doing things the way you want them done for a long time. Yeah, you have to really kind of zip your mouth and just let somebody else take the lead. So a thing that I wanted to, I worked in Lorain County since 1990, so I've been here for a while. And I worked in Elyria, and I worked here. I worked in Avon, and I always used to call it the Lorain County shoot yourself in the foot mentality. People were their own worst critics. And in Lorain, a city that really has tried to come back several times, it's like we're going up the hill, a couple people will go up and then they slide back. And everybody goes, see, I told you it was never going to happen. And then you get a few more daring souls who try again, and then something happens, like the pandemic, and a business closes, or a business has to cut back, or whatever. And then people go, I don't know, they're just quitters. I knew in Lorain nothing ever goes right. We're never going to succeed. We're just doomed. I don't know why they keep trying. And now, our downtown has been revitalized, at least from my experience with the streetscape and everything, since 2019. And a lot of people along Broadway did really well during the streetscape, even though it was really hard to run a business when the sidewalk in front of you was torn up and people couldn't park in front of your business. And then they just started coming back and were ready for a good summer, and what happens? The pandemic hits. And a lot of these businesses, I know myself, you put your house on the line. This is your mortgage that you're trying to pay by running a business and selling a cookie for $1.95. That's a lot of cookies you got to sell, to pay your employees and to pay your mortgage. And so when a business owner doesn't succeed or they're struggling, what would you recommend? How can we get the community or get beyond the community naysayers who say, I knew, Lorain, that downtown, it's never going to happen. We just got to stop this. Yeah. What do we do? Because there's no silver bullet. I heard you say that.
Yeah, there is no silver bullet, and these businesses are taking a big risk, just like the city's taking a big risk to really kind of create a market in downtown Lorain. And the world doesn't always reward those who go first. They're the ones that we remember because they went first, but it's not always easy financially for these businesses to go first. And so what I would say is I think it's the civic, so think about Crocker Park and then think about downtown Lorain. This is just an example. But if you look at Crocker Park, which is all chains and not authentic, but they were trying to create a sense of place off of an interchange because they knew, one, that was what people wanted, but they did it with one master developer who then went out and leased a bunch of national tenants. But they make sure every day that the parking is managed, that the place is programmed, that it's marketed as a district, that they're always looking about what's next, what's changing, what type of business is missing that they can bring to get that experience. I would never trade that for what you have in downtown Lorain or what we have in downtown Sandusky, which is the real thing, and on the water, not off of an interchange, in the heart of a real community with real neighborhoods where people from a variety of incomes can walk in or bike in and be a part of that. That being said, we need to learn from what's making those developments successful. And what I would ask is, are you appropriately resourcing your own public realm management, your own day-to-day marketing of the district, and not from a business to market itself, but for you to market downtown Lorain as a place that people will go to and go to a variety of businesses, designing programming specifically around, will it put people into the seats or shopping in the stores where people have taken the risk? And there's a role for philanthropy in that, there's a role for the city in that, there's a role for nonprofits in that, and for the businesses themselves to really roll up their sleeves and be a part of it. But I think that's at the end of the day is, you have to fight for the people that are fighting for Lorain within those storefronts. And you've made great progress. Like, I look at that streetscape and it's really impressive. I look at what's happening across the river and it's really impressive. But to the point about there being never silver bullet, this is incremental work. There's not going to be this one thing where you're like, we get the streetscape done, and then we can just watch it all play out in front of us. You know what I mean? Like, you need to know what the next thing is, even as you're doing the current thing. And you probably need to even be thinking about what the thing after that is. And Erin Blair is here. She's the City of Sandusky's chief planner. We did the Bicentennial Vision Plan, which is about connecting the community back to the lakefront. We turned the Jackson Street Pier into a public space, and we programmed it similar to what you've done on your river. We did a streetscape with a bike path along our waterfront. But then we rolled right into that. We moved our city hall back into the heart of downtown. We worked with Andy to bring a university anchor into our downtown with Bowling Green State University and Cedar Fair. But then we rolled right into the downtown master plan, which Erin was actually a consultant on. And then she fell in love with Sandusky. She was in Columbus at that time and moved here and took a job with the city. And now she's leading the implementation of that next plan and working on a streetscape for Columbus Avenue, which is our, in the core of downtown, which hasn't also been easy. And so all that to say is, you need to build a pipeline. You need to stick with it. You need to keep funding it. You need to know that there's not one thing that you do that is going to end this and you're going to be back. You know what I mean? Like, it's a constant retooling, replanning, investing. But at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer that almost any community, it's all about right track, wrong track, right? Like, and I think what's been so hard for places like Sandusky and Lorain for so long is that the community viewed it as being on the wrong track, and I think what we've been able to accomplish in Sandusky, maybe more than anything, and imperfectly, is that I genuinely believe our region is starting to think that Sandusky is on the right track. I don't think there's one person that would say we don't have a long way to go. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, they feel like positive things are happening. And I think in Lorain, you've got that spark. And so the question is, how do you nurture it? How do you plan around that? And how do you do that tough day-to-day work? I know Main Street's here. I know you're doing work. I know the port's involved in programming the downtown. Is there a grand vision where everybody understands how those pieces fit together? Are you aligning resources and doing it on a day-to-day basis? Because that's what we're trying to do in Sandusky now. And again, it's a work in process for us too. It's not as if that is done. And in all these communities, it's always going to be a struggle.
Where do you get the funding for all this? I mean, when push comes to shove, we have the queen of the tax credit over here, so I know that does help fund some things, but it's not everything. So how do we put together, I think of all the business owners downtown. I think of Lorenzo's, I think of, Broadway Mary's, I think of the Gilmore, I think of the shipyards, I think of, we're thrilled that Lorain Brewing Company is coming to Lorain. We have Mr. Weaver there. We're very grateful that you're coming, but they're individual people. They're not the chains. They don't have this boatload of money and resources like most of the businesses in Crocker Park. How do we do it when the going gets tough? Where do we get creative with financing?
I think it requires everybody, again, to be at the table. You decide what you want to be, and then you be it. You know what I mean? And if you say you want to have a vibrant core of your community, you have to demonstrate from a philanthropic perspective, from a private investor perspective, from a public perspective, that you're actively investing in that. And not only in the once every 10 years big streetscape, but in addition to that is finding funding. At the end of the day, I know that a community like Lorain has a tremendous amount of needs. But at the end of the day, too, I think there's like maybe a $75 million general fund. If you put some portion of that into this, even like what is 1% of 75%. He said this is to actively program and market and coordinate activities, and you get a foundation to match that, and you get some private businesses to put in money into that. That's how you do it. Like at the end of the day, it's like everybody has to take a piece, but you have to recognize it as a priority that you're able to say out loud. And I think that's really hard in cities like Lorain and in cities like Sandusky, because if you think what's happened to these places over the last 50 or 60 years, they have been decimated by almost every business or every resident that had a choice left. And so what happens when that happens is you have a really strong group of committed people who refuse to leave who could have, and that's great. But a lot of the population of these legacy cities, whether it's Cleveland, Lorain, Sandusky, and all over this part of the world, you have a population that lacks mobility and choices, that at the end of the day has a community with fewer and fewer resources trying to provide basic services and for their basic needs. That's an impossible task. And at the end of the day, I think because that task is so hard and so many people are putting resources into it to make it work and finding success along the way, it feels almost irresponsible sometimes to invest in creating markets in our cities again. But what I would say is it doesn't have to come at the expense of those things, and it's not the only thing that a place like Lorain has to do. You need to continue to focus on rebuilding the schools, dealing with the environmental degradation that happened from the closure of all the heavy industry that was here, working with aging housing stock, providing the basic human needs to those who lack choices. But at the end of the day, one of the easiest things you can do to demonstrate in a visual way that there is something happening sort of starts in the core of the city. So I'm not saying attract new people into the community at the expense of the people who are already here. I'm saying that has to be one part of how you rebuild, because demographically there's no way around this. And I was on the Cleveland School Board for 3 years, and I can tell you, when kids that we worked with in Cleveland schools graduated from Cleveland high schools and then went away to four-year colleges at Ohio State or wherever they went, they did not come back to Cleveland. So as we gave people choices, we knew this statistically, this idea that when we help a child growing up in a neighborhood or Lorain and Sandusky, that they're gonna come right back to the neighborhood that they grew up in is usually not true. You know what I mean? So the reality is you need to do everything you can to serve those people where they're at, to help them have opportunities and choices, but we also need to be able to attract people back into the city who left or who want to be here, and hopefully then when that person goes away to Ohio State and they have choices, they want to come right back to Lorain. So I think this work is divided between serving people and meeting their needs and giving them opportunities, particularly our most vulnerable people, so that they can go out into the world and choose to do anything they want to do. But right alongside that, you have to be building the type of place that people with choices will choose to live. And so it's got to be one of your 4 or 5 top priorities. You have to be okay saying it out loud, even if it doesn't play well at a city council meeting or in a board meeting, because you need an inflow. You need to create a market somewhere in the community, and it will take public philanthropic investment alongside private investment to make it work. So I've never seen it happen without it. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. I think that it's important that our leaders are attuned to that, to getting new kinds of funding to bring new monies in. But I'm a regular citizen. Say, someday when I retire, all I'm doing is, my thing. What can I do to get involved? How can I find out where in my community? I don't know what you do in Sandusky to invite the average everyday person who lives in Lorain or works in Lorain. How can they become involved and really make a difference?
It's really difficult to engage people because most people are working really hard just trying to get by in their own lives. They tangentially know what's going on in the community, but it's usually not what they see on Facebook or what they're still picking up from the local newspapers. But you have to stick with it. And that's something that I think Erin, our chief planner, really brought to the table. We did the South Side plan shortly after she started with the city, that it was a plan for the neighborhood. It was a predominantly African-American neighborhood. It had large institutions. Our hospital was based there. A lot of our school district is based there. But as you know, what tends to happen is as neighborhoods that are transitioning to becoming more low income and you have large institutional investment, it had been kind of ravaged and become more desolate. I think a tremendously significant portion of that plan, as recommended by Erin, was to do community engagement, was to engage that community. And it was tough sledding. We did not get the engagement we wanted, but we invested in it, we stuck with it. And by the time that plan was adopted, that not only did that community support it, but the city commission supported it too, because the community supported it. So again, there's no magic bullet to engage people who, it's hard for, these are people sometimes working 2 jobs, they lack good public transportation, so even to get to a public meeting is difficult, but you have to try to meet them where you're at, wherever you can. You can't give up on it. And we're doing, I'm part of building this new organization out of the pieces of 5 or 6 different organizations. And one of the things that I've realized in our communities that we serve is that we're low on engagement, and that's part of where, like, I've been going around to people the last 6 months being like, does it really make sense for us to have 12 staff and 6 boards to report to? And which is true, but what I'm hearing back from those boards, and it's resonating with me, is that part of the reason they want to meet every month and that we have 6 boards is because people want to feel engaged in what's happening. So if it's not going to just be a board meeting where they feel like they're putting their thumb on us, we need to engage them in ways that engender trust in the work that we're doing and make them feel part of it. And I think whether you're at a neighborhood level or you're at a board level, engagement is hard, but it's critical. And again, it's one of those things when you figure it out, tell us, and we'll
Okay, well,
yeah.
hopefully we'll do that. I hope that after listening to Eric and hearing some of the answers that he's given, it's engendered new questions in you. And so I'm going to ask Monica and Madison to come and get the microphones here for the front of the room. So hopefully some of you will have some questions that you would like to ask Eric and have him hear his thoughts on some of these things. So if you have a question, if you just wave your hand. If you're sitting toward the back, if you wouldn't mind just going up to that microphone, and between Monica and Madison, they'll try to give everybody an equal opportunity to ask your questions.
Thank you. I'm Michael McFarland. I'm City Council in Oberlin and from Sandusky originally. Sandusky has the waterfront, Lorain has the waterfront, and I'm wondering if you can talk about how communities can tap into those kinds of resources, those treasures that they have, or recognize those treasures that they have when they're not quite as obvious as a wonderful pier like Jackson Street Pier or something to rally around and build around.
Well, from a broader perspective, I was reading, I can't remember, I wish I could remember it so I could cite it. It was talking about smaller cities and how they've been really struggling throughout the entire country as people have moved to first the coast and mid-sized cities and suburbs. And so places like Lorain, places like Sandusky have really struggled to figure out how they survive in a 21st century economy, and I think remote work provides opportunities for that. I think there's a lot of things because, just jobs have concentrated so much. But what the study went on to say is that the smaller cities that were bucking the trend, and Oberlin would be a good example of this, they tended to have 3 characteristics, which is really 2 characteristics, I think, when you break it down. One was that they had a strong university presence, which the county might here, and Oberlin certainly does, but Lorain itself, I don't think has that. And then the other 2 factors, which are really one, is that they were either mountainous or coastal. And that's because as people have choices, there has to be a reason that they'd move to this small town. And people love the water, they love the mountains, they love the idea of being in open spaces with something majestic that inspires something in them. And it's hard because I think, along the Lake Erie coast, which by the way is the most privately owned shoreline in the country, I think it's like 91% of Lake Erie in Ohio is owned by private hands. And so that's a problem in a lot of ways. But in addition to that, we used it for industry. We thought of it as a tool, and it grew Lorain, it grew Sandusky, but we didn't think of it as an asset for the public to attract residents, to retain talent or visitors. And so I think that mindset has shifted, but we have a lot to undo, and you have a lot to undo in Lorain, we have a lot to undo in Sandusky. But at the end of the day, it's one of the most critical things, I think. If you were to say to me, like, what does Lorain build around? I think the lakefront and the riverfront as part of its identity, and I've already seen signs of the mayor doing that and other partners doing that. It's what's going to bring people back here. It's going to be what inspires them, and that historic downtown. And so you have to make investments. And again, it seems like just by my drive in, the port's involved, the metro parks are involved, the city's involved. I think that's beautiful. It's like get all the players around the table. You've got developers who I'm sure in part were inspired by overlooking a lake and a river when they brought the hotel here, is figure out the right mix of public space, public access, public programming. And I know there's a major federal grant here to redo some of the infrastructure along the river. Some of this is generational work. As much as we want it to be done quickly, you got to stick to it. You got to get it done. But everything you do should be focused on how the waterfront can be a part of your identity in an important way, both as a marketing tool to attract people, but make sure it's publicly accessible, is the big thing I'd say. And that doesn't mean, because in Sandusky sometimes they think that sort of private development and public access can't coexist. That's absolutely wrong. Sometimes it's a 20-foot, 40-foot boardwalk, but make sure the public can get to it, program it, bring it to life, connect it back to neighborhoods. And so I know that's not necessarily the answer, and I know Lorain has to figure out how to undo some of the infrastructure, the investments, but you've got a great riverfront, you've got a great lake, your downtown touches both of them. There's a lot to build on there, and some of it might take 20 years, but if you start today, it's 20 years from now instead of 20 years from now. So.
Hi, my name is Joan Perch. I'm with an organization called Firefish Arts. We have a person in our past in common, Chris Ronaine. I had the pleasure of working with him when he was the 24-year-old city planner for Jane Campbell, and I was an arts entrepreneur. Now our organization does creative placemaking. He will forever endear himself to me because he would go all over the place and talk about the importance of the arts and community building. And then he would say, my friend Joan Perch said this. And half the time I didn't, but it was lovely that he did it. Could you speak, I know in Sandusky and also in Ohio City, can you speak to the importance, the power of arts and creative placemaking and how that helps to make an organization hip and cool, and what you've done in Sandusky that we could perhaps borrow here in the efforts that we're doing?
Well, again, I want to learn from as much as what's happening here, but what I will say is at the heart of what I think creates a market in a place like Lorain, it builds on the fact that there is authentic culture here. That's history, it's the arts, there's historic architecture here, and there is that waterfront. It's not one of those things at the expense of the others. Even in activating your river and your lake, that needs to be done in a way that embraces culture, whether that's performance art, whether it's visual art and sculptural elements. The arts are critical because cities are going to find their way back by attracting people here because they're interesting. And so if you want to attract people who desire something interesting, you need to be interesting. You know what I mean? And so culture is a critical part of that. In Sandusky, we did create a public fund for the arts. We've tried to partner with the foundation community and our destination marketing organization, Shores and Islands, to do more placemaking, more public art. We're in the process of rebuilding, which was unforeseen, but kind of sped up something that needed to happen, our historic State Theater in downtown Sandusky. Which is a $40 million restoration. It was actually toppled by a windstorm during the pandemic, but the city has contributed $150,000 a year annually to a programming fund, two programming funds actually. One that we administer in my new organization to do outdoor free programming to the public all summer long, and then when the theater reopens later this year, there'll be a fund there for them to do programming indoors between Labor Day and May, so that they can book bigger and better shows and bring better acts to our community and take a little bit of risk using that as a backstop for when they use that fund. And that was designed specifically to support the arts, but also to support the downtown, so that when they have that big show in October, November, December, we get 1,000 people that come downtown who are eating out and drinking. So I'm a big believer in Chris, and he's been a huge mentor of mine over the years, obviously. But his work on the early lakefront plan in Cleveland and then transitioning right to all the work that he did in University Circle, it's the combination of those two things that keep us interesting. And you're never going to out Avon. You know what I mean? Like at the end of the day, and you shouldn't even try. That's not a knock. But at the end of the day, what's going to attract people to Lorain, what's going to hold people in Lorain is different. And it is going to be cultural, and it is going to be a love for the sort of authenticity and grittiness that Lorain has, which to me is what oozes arts. And I'd say Kurt right there, he's an entrepreneur, but he's an artist. Like if you go into Speak of the Devil, that is a work of art, both the way the space is designed, the drinks themselves, the craftsmanship. I think there's a lot of entrepreneurship in the arts too, and figuring out how, whether it's food service, retail, et cetera, you can incorporate the arts in that organic way as well.
Somebody in the back, do you want to come up to the microphone, Sean?
Oh, wait, John.
Good morning, Eric. Thank you for being here. Sean Wenger. I was born in Lorain, moved to Cleveland for college, and moved back to Lorain when I started my family. Really amazing what Ohio City's done over the last 20 years. Living in that area in the late 90s, like it wasn't a place you wanted to visit. Crime, there wasn't businesses there. They were stuck in the chicken and the egg. Who's going to start a business there if you don't have people there? Who's going to move there if you don't have businesses there? Can you talk about maybe some of like the lead dominoes that took place that kind of put that off center? And are there some parallels to us? Just knowing there's some amazing assets they had there. Thinking about the West Side Market, and just think about the assets that we have with the lake, the waterways, access to rail. Just wondering, is there a lead domino or dominoes that came together to make that success story?
You're answering your question with your question, I think, in some ways, in that Ohio City had these great anchors, whether it was the West Side Market, the Great Lakes Brewing Company, which was a brewery that started there in the 80s and brought like 1 million people a year into the neighborhood. St. Ignatius High School, which brought 1,600 high school kids from all over Greater Cleveland in every day. And those anchors were really tremendous in making sure that neighborhood could hold on. But in spite of that, as you know, because the outpull from the city was so strong, I think when I started in Ohio City at the Development Corporation, over half the storefronts right around the West Side Market were empty, and people were walking into the back of the market, and then they were leaving the market, and they weren't really spilling out into the neighborhood. And the board that I worked for then was a community-led board, and most of them were residents by design in the charter, and they really wanted us at that time to focus on housing, preserving individual family housing stock, and we kind of pushed them in our first strategic plan to actually focus on building up the commercial district, because we said, look, the commercial district's driven by 1 million, 2 million visitors a year to the market in Great Lakes. If we get that going, it's gonna create a demand for neighborhood housing. Now, I'll tell you, 5 years later, we're like, maybe we create a little too much demand for housing because it was which Cleveland needed really badly. But so we actually started by working with those anchors to build up the district around those anchors. We put resources into attracting small businesses, and then ultimately worked really hard on the edges of that to build community. We started recreation programming in the neighborhood. We did continue to work on housing. And to your point, when I got to Sandusky, 6 years later, or whatever it was almost the exact same strategy where we're like, okay, it's the lakefront, it's the connection to Cedar Point that we need to make stronger. It's we took stock of what our anchors were, and I think Sandusky had a little fewer anchors than Ohio City did in a variety of ways. And so one of the parts of our plan was, how do we bring anchors? And so we moved City Hall back into the heart of downtown. We worked with Andy and BGSU to bring university. It has 200 students that are in downtown every day, and among some other things that we did. So figure out what your anchors are, do district-based planning, programming, business development around those anchors, and then make those major infrastructure investments you've already done in things like the streetscape, because infrastructure is a big part of Ohio City too. That's the great news, is none of this is rocket science, right? It's like, embrace your entrepreneurs, get one building done at a time. If you get one building done a year in Lorain, in 10 years, you're gonna look back and be like, wow, look what happened, you know what I mean? And sometimes I think it feels so daunting that you don't even do that part of it, and there's no reason this civic community couldn't come together with the private sector and get 1 or 2 projects done a year downtown, and then look back in a decade and be like, this really came together. So, but it's anchors, it's entrepreneurial businesses, it's marketing around those entrepreneurial businesses, because those are the people wanna see. There's something about coming to speak of the devil, or at Great Lakes Brewing in Cleveland or anywhere else, where you go to speak of the devil and you get to meet Kurt, who, and in some ways it's the job of the district to market him and kind of turn him into a celebrity if he hasn't already done that for himself. Because people love that idea of a local business. They come down and they see the merchant, and those are the best merchants, who are there tending bar, front of house, like that becomes the brand and identity. And I think you're on to something here in Lorain. You just gotta keep pushing it, so.
Good morning, Eric. Good to see you again. Thank you for being here. John Falbo from Terminal Ready Mix. I read in Crane's Cleveland Business Magazine this week that Northeast Ohio has an industrial vacancy rate of only 3%. And it's very difficult for industrial businesses to find available properties in Northeast Ohio. And given Lorain and Sandusky's industrial heritage and the workforce in those communities, how can we capitalize on that opportunity?
It's funny because so much of what we talked about today is community development, community revitalization. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that we're doing the fundamentals of the economy really well too. And not only is it a lack of available space, but it's a lack of sites too. And as I'm sure you know in the work that you do, the sites that can attract industry are getting bigger and bigger. And at the end of the day, if you look at site preparedness, where we just met with Team Neo the other day, which is also part of Lorain's footprint, and they said of sites that would meet the criteria for a large industrial company that would be ready right now. And when we've talked about buildings yet, just sites, there was one in their 18-county footprint of like 600 acres or more that's ready to go right now. And so everything I've seen, and the question is, we'd want to work with folks like you to figure out, is we need to get some some spec'd out, some capacity that people can come in and speculative development so that there is more space. The same thing, we're doing a joint economic development plan with Huron County, which is our neighbor to the south, Norwalk, Ohio. And the availability of space for a tenant is almost negligible. So you need someone in your community that's willing to do 3 or 4 years of work to attract a business. Most site selections are like a 12 to 18 month process, and so we need to be focused on it. I think it's a regional effort, and I know Team NEO's focused on it, but we have to prepare sites. There's an infrastructure investment required in that, and I do think we need some speculative space. Even things we were learning the other day, that cold storage, for example, there's like no cold storage, and it's dramatically needed to the point where maybe a developer would be willing to take a chance on building a cold storage facility and then attract that, but we have to make sure that we help them to make that risk, and we make the infrastructure investments necessary to allow them to do it. But it's a huge part of the puzzle. I'm not an expert on that. We're working on it. Nico from our team is here, and he's our business retention specialist. You met Nico. We'd love to keep talking to businesses like yours and figure out what you need and how to do it. So, thank you. Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions. Anybody else?
So I want to start off by saying that, Eric, when I first took office, probably like the first 2 months, even before the pandemic, I made a trip to Sandusky because I had heard about all the great things that you had done on your lakeshore. And so I wanted to come out there and see exactly what you did and how you did it. And it did inspire me to try to do similar things in the city of Lorain. So I want to thank you for that. But I know that you mentioned about moving City Hall to the center of town in Sandusky. And I want you to explain to all of us how important it was to move City Hall from way far away from your downtown area to right to the center of downtown. How important was that to the development of Sandusky?
It was the first big domino to fall in getting others to think about downtown projects at that scale. Because what we did with our project, for those who aren't familiar, and we had a lot of pressure to build a new building, maybe not go downtown, have a big surface parking lot next to it. We didn't do that. We took the 3 largest vacant buildings right at the southern gateway into our downtown, and we actually partnered with a private developer because they were able to leverage state historic tax credits, federal historic tax credits, and new market tax credits that made the deal work. And we actually took 1/3, which is about as much as we were allowed to take under one of those credits as a public tenant, and that helped leverage their ability to do apartments and then storefronts underneath. And so it was a mixed-use development. The city, upon the expiration of the tax credits, will purchase its space within that development, and they'll create a condominium association where they buy it. And that was really exotic for our city council, our commission in Sandusky to understand, but we pushed it really hard because it was important. There was some public pushback on it, but it demonstrated to folks, and one of the things that we heard, there's 20 apartments in that space, and so many naysayers were like, you're never going to be able to run apartments in downtown Sandusky that aren't right on the water, and this is 3 blocks from the water. They gave themselves, I think, 18 months to lease up, and it leased up within 9 months, it's full. And so now, since then, we've had, I think, another 140, 150 apartments developed in the core. So getting the first 20 done was a lot harder than getting the next 150 done downtown. And it's just been a real anchor. And then, like Lorain, one of the things I think is most in common, and I was so blown away by, even before we met, kind of driving back, is how similar Lorain and Sandusky are from the perspective of that you've got a big municipal building right on the lakefront that's a little bit disconnected from the core of the downtown. Not close, but just feels further than it should. And I think a lot of the people in Sandusky were most excited about us moving City Hall so that the waterfront could be developed. And that is part of the plan, and we are actively working on a public space and private development along the lakefront for us. But that's probably still 5 years away, and we moved City Hall 5 years ago. So at the end of the day, I think the biggest impact you'll make in the short term, and the most important, is to get potentially your City Hall in the heart of your downtown, and then you can begin planning for your lakefront to do it the right way. And the market that you create, and I think this is happening to us now, by virtue of your core downtown getting stronger, means whatever happens at the lake 10, 20 years from now will be bigger and better. And that may seem like forever, but I guarantee if you started today, it's probably going to take 10 or 12 years anyways, which is exactly what's happened to us. So, but it was critical, it was catalytic, it was a first domino, and I think there's going to be a second return on that, which is when eventually the former site gets redeveloped as a dynamic waterfront space, and I can see that in your future for Lorain as well.
We don't really have time for any more questions, but I know Eric will stay around for a little bit. So if you have a question you'd like to ask him before he goes downstairs for another meeting at 10:30, please feel free. And I think, thank you very much. So, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Eric. Please give Eric another round of applause. He's fantastic. Great thoughts in an initial conversation, and I know that the conversation is going to keep going. As I mentioned in my opening comments, this was an inaugural event of community conversations. We will have a couple more this year, so please be on the lookout for information for those. Our next one will be at essentially our annual meeting in May. But really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us this morning and helping us launch an unbelievable program series here at the Lorain Historical Society. Again, thank you and appreciate you being here.